Thank you. Thank you so much, Toby, and thank you, Corporate Knights, for that recognition, and bravo, Toby, for all the incredible work you've been doing over the years. And I have to say that the people that I've met here tonight are so impressive. The work that's being done in so many corporations across the country on sustainable development issues is truly inspiring. And I'll share with you something that you might not have seen, but Elizabeth Dowdswell worked with me on a book put together by Sofiane Baba, a professor of sustainable development in the environment program at l'Université de Sherbrooke, entitled, because it only exists in French, and she wrote the introduction in French. The book is called 30 idées reçues sur le développement durable. It came out 2 years ago, and it's well worth the read. And thank you, Elizabeth, for your devotion to the issue. I'd like to begin by expressing, therefore, my sincere gratitude to the people who have, for decades now, at Corporate Knights, shown that they understand the importance of sustainable development. And the recognition of a sustainable development law that was brought in some 20 years ago is, for me, an honor, but it's also appropriate because it is in lockstep with the work of Corporate Knights. That legislation, I dare say, has aged well. The act itself was adopted unanimously by Quebec's National Assembly in 2006. It was the culmination of some 18 months of work that began in the fall of 2004, so exactly 20 years ago, with the presentation of both a detailed plan for sustainable development and a draft bill. That vast consultation took us to 21 cities and communities across the province of Quebec, and the consultation proved essential on 2 counts. First, we got to hear and learn about local concerns, experience, and knowledge, which was particularly important in Indigenous communities. And we were, as a result, able to include many new ideas. I sincerely believe that listening to people gives you that richness, and it's so important because the second way it works is that as a result of those contacts, there's a buy-in. There's a consensus that's built. People understand the references, and they're on board. People felt respected and included, and it enhanced the bill's chances at the committee stage, which was quite lengthy. Je peux partager avec vous que les travaux en commission parlementaire se sont étalés sur plusieurs mois, étaient parfois ardus, mais ça a valu la peine parce que, comme je l'ai mentionné dès le départ, il s'agissait d'une loi qui a été adoptée unanimement par l'Assemblée nationale. One of the key elements was the enactment of an amendment to the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. It added a new section, Section 46.1, and that stipulates, quote, every person has a right to live in a healthful environment in which biodiversity is preserved. Over the past 2 decades, the courts have given life to that provision, and a solid body of jurisprudence has reaffirmed that right. Now, it wasn't applauded by everyone when it was first proposed. Some of my academic colleagues said that placing it in the section of the Charter dealing with economic and social rights watered it down, didn't go far enough. But it's interesting to note that since then, they have been won over because of the work of the courts, using that as an invisible finger on the scale when the courts had to decide whether or not they were going to go in favor of sustainable development and protection or not. It's played that role. And it didn't have to go beyond that section, but the results have been there. And that's what this is about. Around the cabinet table, at least one colleague questioned why environment made its way into the Charter and not his portfolio. Coming as I do from a family of 10 kids, I had some experience with that kind of reasoning, but was able to convince all of my colleagues that the provision provided greater overall public protection in all areas, along with its environmental thrust. The law sets out 16 guiding principles that apply to decision-making in all government agencies and ministries, and it is taken very seriously by senior government officials. Now, this was my idea, so I'll say that it helps, that the Treasury Board includes respect for the Sustainable Development Act in the list of performance indicators used when determining the bonus of those senior bureaucrats. Their hearts will follow when it involves their salaries. Those 16 principles put human health and quality of life at the top of the list and includes things that you'd expect to see in there, like polluter pay and internalization of costs. Perhaps less obvious is the principle of subsidiarity, which states that powers and responsibilities must be delegated to the appropriate level of authority. Decision-making centers should be adequately distributed and as close as possible to the citizens and communities concerned. That principle is being reflected in the increased role for local and regional governments in environment and sustainable development, comme on vient de le voir dans le cas de la Société des Transports de Montréal. Au municipal, on est en train de mener le bal dans la lutte au changement climatique. When the environmental movement began in earnest in the 60s and early 70s, whether it was with the creation of the EPA in the United States or our first environment ministry here in Canada, the approach was resolutely top-down. Now, in my view, and based on my experience, there are only two types of policies in public administration: those that work and those that don't work. The corollary, of course, is that when what you're doing doesn't work, try something else. But what does it mean, really, to say that something works? Well, for me, it means that it produces a measurable result. You can't manage what you can't count. And that's why the work that Toby and Corporate Knights are doing in developing the databases to analyze things objectively is so important. But you and I know that you can't count good intentions. In fact, you can't even count on them. You can't count emotional political speeches. Those don't count. Quebec, like Ottawa, has a commissioner who does the report card on environment and sustainable development, and thankfully looks and concentrates on results, or lack thereof, for government policies in the area. One of the constant observations is that governments consistently fail to achieve the results they've promised. The top-down approach is giving way, therefore, to get the results, to a more grassroots approach across the country, and you'll see that. That gives a bigger role to the municipal and regional orders of government, and it is helping to improve results. It's never easier. Here in Ontario, you recently went through a political psychodrama around the proposed dismantling of parts of the Greenbelt that was supposed to be there in perpetuity for future generations. You know what? You're not alone. In Quebec, we boast hard and fast rules about protecting wetlands and other precious habitat. But if there's a large industrial project like the Northvolt battery plant right now, those principles get bulldozed along with everything else. Rules have to be respected, but uniform enforcement is often an elusive goal. The distance between what politicians say about the environment and what they do is sometimes enormous. That's why I found it more than a little bit ironic that in a recent budget bill, the government proposed the creation of the offense of greenwashing for companies that don't do what they say on the environment. Now, I also note with great interest a recent proposal before the Welsh Parliament, the Synnwyr Camera, that would make it an offense for a member or a candidate to make a statement that is known to be false and deceptive. That's putting the shoe on the other foot, or to put it another way, what's sauce for the goose is indeed sauce for the political Pinocchio gander. It's a delightful recipe, and if we're going to be distributing blames like that based on analysis, well, everybody should get one. Canada's current and former commissioners of sustainable development have both said that the federal government has repeatedly made commitments and promises on climate goals and timelines without any credible plan to respect them. My favorite was a senior Liberal who tried to explain why they never even came close to respecting Canada's obligations under the Kyoto Protocol. He said they'd signed Kyoto, quote, to galvanize public opinion, but admitted that they never had a plan to meet the targets. For them, signing Kyoto was a public relations exercise. Of course, later under the Conservatives, Canada became the first country in the world to withdraw from the Kyoto Protocol. But I'm not sure which was worse, saying yes and then doing nothing because you had no plan to do anything, or saying no and then withdrawing and walking away. I know that neither of those things is going to help future generations. We've learned a lot since Rachel Carson wrote her seminal work, Silent Spring, in the 1960s. We talk about ecosystems, how everything is connected in nature. We've learned what works. When Mulroney and Bush brought in the first cap-and-trade system to deal with the harmful emissions that were causing acid rain, they didn't emote. They took action. They enforced. Ronald Reagan wasn't a scientist, but when the best scientific minds told him there was a hole in the ozone layer caused by CFCs, he and Mulroney took action, and the worldwide Montreal Protocol was signed and has been enforced ever since. And that ozone hole is closing. It's a good thing that Reagan didn't have to deal with ozone hole deniers. Canada is the second largest country in the world and the only one to front on 3 oceans. We're also a huge laboratory for climate change and its effects on permafrosts, forests, flooding, Arctic ice, and biodiversity. Stronger storms and record wildfires are very real, and they have been modeled and predicted for years. There is tremendous work and incredibly promising research being done on new technologies, for example, for carbon capture and storage. Now, while that work has to continue, it's not enough, or at least it's not enough fast enough. Canada's vast natural resources are indeed a blessing, but we also have to do better at using them wisely. The necessary transition away from fossil fuels will at the same time entail the need to enhance the extraction of critical minerals. Everybody understands that. Mining, like all economic activity, can cause social and economic conflict if not done right. In the end, an across-the-board sustainable development approach, like the one we're talking about tonight, can provide a surer and clearer path with buy-in towards social acceptability. If there's confidence, it's easier. In ending, I'd like to share that since leaving politics and returning to university, I've often been asked, and it dovetails with what Toby mentioned earlier, I've often been asked whether I'm optimistic for the future. My answer has always been yes, I am. Then, when I meet the cohorts of bright young students who understand that we have to do things differently from now on, I'm always comforted in that optimism. And it's an optimism that's reinforced when I have the opportunity to be in a room full of business leaders from such a vast array of different sectors of activity coming together for years now to recognize the importance of doing things right for the environment, for society, and for the economy. Thank you for all that you do.
That's it, long. Keep it. Get put on to the.
Thank you, Tom. So that concludes the programming part of the evening. Now, some of you might be hungry. I know that I can see the little boys here are getting fidgety. They're ready for dinner, definitely. So I just wanted to just take this last opportunity to express my gratitude for all of your leadership who are here tonight, and also like to thank the great team at Corporate Nights for all the work they do, and the team here at the Design Exchange for putting on such a swell evening. So thanks kindly, and have a good night.